Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this live event today. Today, we have a couple of my favorite topics. We're going to talk about emotions and we're going to talk about negotiations. And with a very special guest, Paul Fisher, we're going to get him to know him a bit more. But before we talk about us, why don't we talk about you, our audience? So first of all, thank you for the people that will be watching the recording of this event. But also a warm thank you to all the ones that are joining live, that want to participate, want to ask questions, want to really leverage the possibility that we have Paul with us to discover some more about how emotional intelligence can shape negotiations. So maybe, for the audience, then, if you could tell us something about maybe from where you're connecting, that would be nice to know where you're connecting. Paul is from the UK. I am Italian, living in Switzerland, currently in Asia. So let's see what kind of mix of people we are gonna get for this live event. So just use the chat system that you see on the right side of your screen, and let us know from where you are connecting. By the way, maybe you have also some specific expectations from this live event. So let's see. Okay, well, the first user is actually from Asia. It's from Hong Kong. Thank you very much for joining us. Fantastic. Then we have Julia from Rome. Okay. And we have Karin from Zurich. Hello. Another negotiation expert. Hello, Karin. Great to see you. And then we have Chris from Belgium. So, okay, quite a variety of people. Good. Then we have Tatiana. Hello, Tatiana from Geneva. Fantastic. So, okay, perfect. We see more and more people joining us. Fantastic. And, okay, but I don't know, of course, why special event, because Paul, we know, is the program director of the legendary Oxford Program on Negotiation, one of the best-selling program in the world of negotiation, great reputation, attracting people from all over the world. So let's try to find out a bit more about our special guest today. Paul, can you say a few words about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Giuseppe, and lovely to see you all. It's great to have such an international audience. My name is Paul Fisher. I run the Oxford Program on Negotiation. We hold it twice a year, and people from around the world, including a couple of familiar names on this call, come to Oxford to learn the art and science of negotiation, which are, as I'm sure you all agree, is a fascinating topic. I teach negotiation and lots of other different programs. I do work outside the business school as well, and really looking forward to spending the next 45 minutes with you talking about this fascinating subject about emotions and negotiation.
Amazing, fantastic. My name is Giuseppe Conti, and I'm also a professor in Switzerland, and I'm also the founder of CABL, a company that specializes in negotiation and influencing, and became a professor in the later part of my career. I worked in a corporate world for over 25 years beforehand. Okay, so let's talk about emotional intelligence. So let's start, with maybe a general question. How would you define emotional intelligence, and why it is important in negotiations?
Thanks, Giuseppe. I mean, emotional intelligence is a word that has been bounded about a lot. Very famous book by Daniel Goleman on emotional intelligence. But I'd say it's pretty simple, the definition. It's that ability to notice your emotions and notice your counterpart's emotions, and to use that information to make better choices and decisions in negotiation. And I genuinely think pretty much all the great negotiators have that emotional intelligence. On my negotiation program in Oxford, we work with a brilliant negotiator called Baroness Cathy Ashton, who was the head of the EU's negotiations for many years. Angela Merkel in the world of business, Satya Nadella, they all have emotional intelligence in bucket loads. So they can read the room. They can understand sometimes not what's just being said, but what's not being said. They can detect people's emotions. They can label emotions. So, I mean, I just think it's so fundamental. And it's also about self-awareness, isn't it? And I think the great negotiators are also self-aware as well. And that's part of emotional intelligence. How you come across, how you're landing with your counterpart. What are the listening? What are the emotions going on in the room? Is your counterpart frustrated, defensive, excited? Detecting the things which are really important to them. So I love emotional intelligence, and I think it's something that everybody can learn.
Fantastic. By the way, a small self-awareness exercise for our audience. How do you feel right now? Are you excited to listen to Paul? Are you intrigued about what you're going to listen? Let's try, just start by, making this quick exercise and recognizing the emotion that you're feeling right now.
Hopefully positive emotion.
Hopefully positive emotion, yes. Also, because let's face it, the beginning of this year has not been quite, the best. And, there was so much negativity around the world with what's happened in the first 3 weeks. So, let's enjoy, a few moments of positive emotion and hopefully inspiring learning on this. Let me maybe a rhetorical question, but do emotions matter in negotiation? And why do negotiation provoke emotions?
Yeah, a very good question, Giuseppe. I mean, my answer to the first one, I think, is yes, emotions absolutely matter in negotiations. I mean, it's interesting how negotiation theory has developed. I mean, many of you will have read that brilliant book, Getting to Yes, and that talked about separating the people from the issues. But I think it's really impossible to do that. We are all human beings, and of course AI is playing a role in negotiations, but ultimately, normally, it's one human negotiating with another. So I think emotions are really important. You can't just check them out at the door and then negotiate. And what's also interesting, there's been a lot of research over the last few years showing there's a direct link between how you feel in a negotiation and how you actually do. It was Jared Cohen and his colleagues at MIT in the US found a direct link. So in other words, if you come out of one negotiation feeling good about yourself, feeling like you've been respected, feeling positive, feeling like you're a competent negotiator, if you go into another negotiation with the same people, you'll actually do better objectively as well. So I think there's an absolute direct link between the two. Your other question, Giuseppe, why do negotiations provoke emotions? I think there's a number of reasons. Firstly, for a lot of people, negotiation is quite a stressful experience. It's that sort of idea of you against me, that sort of adversarial characteristic. I would argue it doesn't have to be like that, but I think people don't like that adversarial element. And sometimes there's a loss of control. We like control in our lives, and in negotiations, you're never quite sure how your counterpart is going to react. Will they be collaborative, competitive? Will they have more power than you think? So it's that unpredictable element, which I think makes people elicit emotions. I think feedback, a lack of feedback. We don't often get feedback in negotiations. So that tends to sort of elicit anxiety and makes negotiation sometimes quite an uncomfortable place to be. Also confidence. We sometimes don't tend to be very confident in negotiations. And if we're not confident, we tend to be anxious, and anxious negotiators don't always tend to be very successful negotiators. And the final thing I'd say is we struggle to kind of put ourselves in the other side's shoes. So we often we fail to understand our counterparts, and that often can lead to frustration, anger, anxiety, surprise. So it can be quite a stressful place to be.
Wow, Okay, so much already in this reply. Now, let me for a moment interact with the audience. I'm happy to see that a number of you played the game and shared, how you're feeling right now about this workshop. Now, remember, this is your live event, so I do have plenty of questions for Paul. But most importantly, we want to make sure that you get your question answered. So if you do have something that you want to ask, please type it in the chat, and then we're going to stop at the appropriate moment. Now, let me build for a moment about what you were mentioning about the research from Professor Kuran from MIT about this idea of subjective and objective value, right? So very often we focus on the objective value, what your boss measures, right? The price, the payment terms, the volume, the milestones, and those kind of things. And the interesting element of this research from 2008 is that he actually puts a lot of focus on the importance of the subjective value. So how the people feel about the experience, how they feel about the process, how they feel about themselves, how they feel about the relationship. Because, if people feel good, they're going to be more willing to work with you, and you will end up, getting better value afterwards. Think it over, especially if you're already an experienced negotiator, and I see here quite a few. I see Raul, I see Samuel, I see Sol, people that have been negotiating, Martina, that have been negotiating for a while. So, if you're already an experienced negotiator and you know how to get some good objective value, now, the next step is really being able to also get this subjective value so that the people feel good about the experience with you. Now, let's continue about this journey of emotion. Maybe, you already mentioned a few, but let me try to ask you to go more in depth. Can you give me some example of the most common emotions in negotiation? And how can you better manage yours and other people's emotions?
Great. That's a great question, Giuseppe. I mean, as I said, there's lots of emotions in negotiation. It could be guilt, frustration, surprise, relief, sympathy. But I think two really common emotions are anxiety and anger. And I mean, just going through both of those, I mean, we've all felt anxious in a negotiation. It might be negotiating with our boss for a pay rise, I don't know, a new pricing structure with a client, a lawsuit, buying a new home. Many of you, I'm sure, have bought new homes or new cars, which you set your heart on. So it's a very emotional interaction. So the stakes are quite high, and we do get anxious. And as I said, the research shows if you tend to be an anxious negotiator, you don't tend to actually get an optimal outcome. Why? Because you want the whole ordeal to be over. You give away things too easily. You just want to get out of that room. So when it comes to anxiety, how you can alleviate and better manage it, I think preparation. The more you prepare, the more confident you tend to be clear about your goals, and practice negotiating. On our negotiation program, for example, I would say we spend 60 or 70% of the week negotiating, doing simulations. So I think preparation, trying to visualize the different paths the negotiation might take, mapping out scenarios. What if my counterpart suggests a price discount? What if the issue of earn-out comes up? So the more you can kind of be aware of the different scenarios, the more confident, the less anxious you tend to be. But I'd say that the most important thing, and I say this at all my negotiation classes, is if you can reframe the negotiation. So it's not a me against you, it's a we together solving a common problem. Anxiety tends to sort of ebb away, because there you are, you're collaborating, it's not an opponent you're dealing with, it's a colleague, and you've got a common problem that you share, and you're trying to work towards a common solution. So I really encourage you to kind of reframe the negotiation, because as I said, that word negotiation can be really stressful. When the European Union was formed, Jean Monnet, who was a very famous French diplomat, he banned the word negotiation. This wasn't a negotiation, this was a joint problem-solving activity where European countries would come together and try and ensure that they never went to war again. So, second one, of course, is anger. As I said, anger is pretty prevalent in negotiations. But one of the things about, I mean, you see there's many examples of famous negotiators who use anger. Bernie Ecclestone, the former head of Formula One, used anger. Donald Trump uses anger. Everyone will remember the Zelensky, the infamous Zelensky meeting in the White House. And what I'd say about anger is, well, firstly, don't get angry yourself, because anger against anger doesn't tend to lead to good results. It leads to impasses, lack of trust. So keep calm. And the more you can try and differentiate where that anger is coming from, the more effective you are as a negotiator. So, for example, some people, and I think Donald Trump does this, he uses anger as a tactic, as in he's not genuinely angry, but he thinks it's going to get him more in the negotiation. So in that situation, what you really need to be is to be resolute, to show resolve, to show resilience. But sometimes people will be angry for a real reason. They'll be genuinely angry. And in that kind of environment, your approach should be very different. It should be trying to find out why they're angry, ask questions, listen, try to understand their grievances. And the one thing I would say is, if you get confronted by anger, don't let it be successful. So don't give away things because someone's being angry. Don't lose your resolve, because if they see that, they'll think, wow, this is great, and they'll continue being angry. If they don't see that, it's actually really hard work being angry for too long, so they'll tend to dissipate. So, and I mean, long answer here, Giuseppe, but other things, go for a walk, take a time out, calm down, take on the process. So you could say, we could go round and round like this, going back and forth about who's to blame, but surely our time will be better spent working on a solution. So the more you can, again, reframe the negotiation, the more opportunity there is for success.
Wow.
Very
nice. Yeah, loved it. So, what we are saying is, if I summarize, the key ideas is that when dealing with anxiety, preparation and practice will certainly help. That's why, our workshop are so much based on practice, because that's by doing that you ended up learning. And by the way, if I may, let me give the opportunity to let people know about when the Oxford program on negotiation will take place, because I will have the pleasure to be there as well, and it will be from the 7th to the 12th of June. The next event of the Oxford program on negotiation, an amazing program. Spend a week in Oxford and get some of the best learning in your life. So the next program, Oxford program on negotiations, from the 7th, starts on Sunday night and it finishes on Friday at lunchtime. So 7th to the 12th of June, check it out. And I think, you will not regret it. So we were saying about anxiety, and we also, you may have noticed an important distinction in the message of Paul, the difference between genuine and fake anger, or used as a tactic, right? I want you to capture how you behave different in those two kind of setup. If people just pretend to be angry to try to get a concession from you, then you want to be firm. Maybe you respond with the same tone. Maybe you name the tactic or whatever. You find a way, right? Maybe to de-escalate afterwards. By the way, one of the techniques that I do like in those kind of context, it comes from neurolinguistic programming. I'm also a practitioner of neurolinguistic programming, and this technique is called pacing and leading. So pacing means you match the energy level of the other person, and then you lead them to where you are. So let's assume that Paul is shouting at me. Then I will, okay, Paul, listen, we can shout for a long time. Now, I think we both know that if really want to solve this, then we need to have a different kind of tone. So let's try to see if we can take a moment, you see, so, you start at the same energy level, and then, you bring the discussion at a different tone. Okay, amazing, fantastic. Now,
add to that, I love what you said there. And I think one of the things we talk about sometimes is targeted validation. So you're not necessarily agreeing with your counterpart, but you're kind of empathizing. So I can understand how you might find this frustrating. I can see what you've managed to achieve here. So you're validating what they're doing. And sometimes just labeling emotions can be really powerful as well, because you actually create a gap between the emotion. So it kind of takes the sting out of the negotiation. So you seem, correct me if I'm wrong, but you seem a little bit frustrated on this. And they might say, yes, I am. And the more times you get people to say yes in a negotiation, the better. Sorry, Giuseppe.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, there are, we can build a bit more about this idea about, how can you manage other people's emotions, right? So if they're really genuinely angry and you want to help them to calm down, Paul mentioned quite a few ideas. Maybe another thing, maybe apologize if you did something wrong, or maybe, apologize for your behavior, or sorry, I lost my temper, or whatever, something like this, that also apologies if they sound sincere. Now, if you make an apology just to pretend, but your voice and body language doesn't convey it, then it doesn't work. But if indeed you're able to make a sincere apologies, that's maybe another way to help the other person to regain their emotional balance. Now, the other topic that Paul was mentioning is what do you do to manage your own emotions? So okay, and taking a break, talk about the process, mentioning the emotions and those kind of things that you've heard before. Now, I wanted to have your perspective on this one, Paul. And this is an idea that comes from my friend Hordi Quidbach, the negotiation professor at TESADE, with whom I had the pleasure to collaborate as well. And Jordi applies the theory of Kahneman in this way. The traditional approach from getting to yes is count to 10 or count to 100, to calm down. Now, Jordi turned around and says, count from 1,000 downward in steps of 7. So 1,993, 986, 979, 972, because the idea is that if you make a complex calculation, then you're more likely to activate, the rational part of the brain, and so you will release the pressure on the emotional side of the brain. What's your thought on this one, Paul?
I love all. I think that's a great suggestion there. I think it really depends on every individual. They have different ways of preparing. So ultimately, you want to be in the best possible emotional state to negotiate. Generally, people who feel relaxed, feel confident, feel positive, tend to be more effective. And there's lots of different things you can do. Some people, for example, do mindfulness. They get a huge amount out of mindfulness. So just spending a couple of minutes before the negotiation, just focusing on your breathing, focusing on your body, trying to get all the blah blah in the background out of your mind, all those little demons saying, oh, this is a big day-to-day, Paul, you can't, the company depends on you now. So I think those are people use apps like Headspace and Calm. I like to go for a walk. Some of the great negotiations have taken place during and after walks. So I think there's lots of different elements you can do to make sure you're in the best possible shape to negotiate. And I'd say having an emotional strategy is really important. So often when we talk about preparation, we talk about focusing on who the people are, what are the issues, defining the process, but kind of figure out emotionally what are your trigger points? What are the things which make you angry? How will you react, for example, if someone is rude or late? And how can you manage that and ensure that it doesn't have a negative effect in the negotiation? And of course, it all comes back to emotional intelligence, really, as well, doesn't it? It's that self-awareness and being really present in the negotiation and understanding what's being said, what's not being said, listening and choosing based on your emotions, kind of almost doing a internal dialogue and figuring out what the best behavior is and the best outcome is to ensure the success in the negotiation.
Fantastic. We have a question from Sol. Let's see what the question. Hello, Sol. Okay. In negotiations, how do you differentiate useful from not useful emotions, and how to deal with it? How do you respond differently?
That's a really good question. I mean, we've talked. I mean, emotions don't easily just fall into the category of good emotions and bad emotions, because they're more nuanced than that. But again, I think it's about self-awareness, about emotional intelligence. So understanding, for example, I mean, take a negotiation. You're in the room, and you're trying to be kind of aware of what's going on, and sort of feeling what, you know, you feel like I feel a bit frustrated here. I'm feeling a bit defensive, and you feel like speaking or saying something which isn't going to necessarily help the negotiation. But it's that through emotional intelligence, you can think, well, I could say this, but is that really going to help? And actually holding back and not saying it. So a lot of it is kind of internal. And as I said, I mean, anger, the research shows that anger sometimes can be effective in negotiations, but long term, it's a very risky strategy. So if you feel like you're being angry, try and pull back, take a deep breath, maybe take a time out if you feel anger is really building on both sides, and responding accordingly. So I think, Maria, the bottom line is it's all about self-awareness. It's about being aware of what's going on, reading the room, managing your emotions, and of course managing your counterparts, and figuring out what's helpful for the negotiation and what is going to be a potential obstruction in the negotiation.
Yeah. And then, by the way, you know, it may happen to all of us, you know, sometime to lose control, and then, you know, the more we become aware, we take it as a piece of information, then the better it is. You know, allow me to share a personal story, right? You know, when I was a procurement director, and I had a difficult supplier, a supplier that was not performing, with whom we had a number of problems, but, you know, we were in a single source supply for some of the products, and, you know, we had to continue to work with them. Then there was a new account manager that turned things around, and everything worked well again. But then this account manager was so good that he was promoted and he moved to another job. And then we had a new account manager. At the same time, his boss also changed. So we had a completely new team with whom to interact. We were meeting for the first time, and I prepared the meeting with the account manager. Well, you know, we defined, remember, one of the advice that you get from me is, you know, negotiate the process before you negotiate the substance. So, you know, we took our time to negotiate the process, to understand what we were going to do, in what order, etc., etc. Everything looked clear. So I had a good discussion with this new account manager. It looked that we were going to be on the same page. They come over to meet us, and, you know, we do the introduction, etc. And then they start the meeting and say, oh, by the way, we want to tell you, for this product, you know, our prices go up by 25%. So, you know, we had not talked about this. It was not on the agenda. And the guy starts the meeting like this, you know. So I really felt, you know, the anger. I wanted to shout and say, out of the room. But of course, you know, that will not be the right way. So then, you know, you have to find the techniques that you were talking before, you know, to try to find a way to keep your emotion under control when they're negative. Because of course, you know, if you start, you know, letting them go and really telling to your counterparts what you think about them, then of course, you know, it may backfire, especially you know, if you're in a weak position and you need to use them over time afterwards.
Yeah, okay, no, I think that's a really good point. What I would say, Daniel Goleman talks about the amygdala hijack, and that's where I don't know if anyone who's read Kahneman, that's where your system one, your emotional kind of regulator, takes over your more kind of rational, conscious part of the brain. And that often doesn't tend to lead to good decisions. So if you feel like you're getting flustered, your heart's beating, your palms are sweating, you're kind of feeling angry or anxious, it doesn't tend to lead to really good, strong decisions. So it's as Giuseppe said, it's taking a step back and being prepared for when someone does something like that. You know, suddenly, oh, by the way, price is going to go up 25%. sometimes it's best to ignore them because you don't actually know whether they're just using that as a tactic or whether that's an actual part of the negotiation. Donald Trump gets everyone very angry, and he kind of intends to with these extreme demands. And that's kind of part of his strategy. And sometimes I think we get a little bit kind of flustered and carried away and too angry with actually, rather than actually taking a step back and realizing that's actually kind of part of a strategy. Going with an extreme demand, you know, the total ownership of Greenland, and then that changes the whole negotiation parameters in his favor.
Yeah, yeah. And we have seen that, you know, remember what we said just a few minutes before, when anger is used as a tactic, the right approach is not to apologize, to listen, to acknowledge, etc. The right approach is to be firm and to stay on similar terms before you move to a more collaborative type of approach. Fantastic. Now, final question, you know, our time is up. I see that we passed the half an hour milestone. You know, how can you become a more emotional intelligence? And can it be learned?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can. I think breaking it into stages is really helpful. And there's an excellent article actually in Harvard Business Review. It's about 6 years old now, but I think it's a really helpful. It was by Jennifer Porter. Really helpful. I'm happy to send the link. Really helpful in working out how you use emotional intelligence as a skill, how you learn it. And it breaks down really into 4 stages. So be present. So pay attention to what is happening in the moment, not what was said 15 minutes ago or what will happen in the future, but now. So that requires you to really listen. Don't suspend judgment. Be totally involved in the moment. Don't feel like you have to talk. Be comfortable with silence. So be present and also be self-aware. So what am I seeing? What am I hearing? What am I feeling? What am I doing? What am I saying? And then based on that, identify a range of choices. So what do I need to do next? And what are the possible consequences of each action? What are the alternatives if I don't do that action? And then based on that, choose the behavior that you believe will be most productive and will generate the best outcome. So put that into the negotiation context, be present. So you might feel irritation, a sense of urgency from the other side. You put forward a proposal. Be self-aware. There's clearly something quite important, something significant at stake for them here. Then, of course, identify your choices. You know, I could push this proposal, but is that going to make them more defensive? Perhaps I should ask what's driving their resistance, and then basically decide what you're going to do. I'm going to slow down here. Maybe I've put forward this proposal too early, so let me slow down, explore their interests, and kind of bring the temperature down in the room. So that's kind of a step-by-step process to how to manage that negotiation. So it's so important to have that antennae and just be aware of what's being said, but not just what's being said, what's not being said, what the tone is. There's a reason why I've got 2 of these and 1 of these. So seek to understand before being understood. Giuseppe.
Yeah. And the author is Jennifer Porter, right? You know, Harvard Business Review. Okay, perfect. Then,
That's
you know,
right.
what we'll do, we will add it to this chat so that then, you know, you will be able to check this out in case you're interested. By the way, let me give you also the opportunity. Let me tell you a bit more about our next live event. It's going to be with a sales expert, you know, one of the top 10 global guru for sales, Mark Hunter, an American expert, and he's going to be on the 10th of February. Selling with integrity is the only way to sell with Mark Hunter. Yes, it's going to be on the 10th of February at 3 o'clock Central European time. So if you're in sales or if you are in any other function and want to learn more about sales, you know, also often, you know, we are selling inside our company. You know, all of us are salesperson inside our company. So there may be an opportunity also to learn from one of the leading experts in the field. Check it out. And if you're available on the 10th of February, that will be great to connect with you again. Now, Paul, that was such a rich exchange. Thank you very much. I think
You're very
we both
welcome.
enjoyed the project and the topic, and we had fun exchanging. I'm happy that the audience stay with us, and hopefully you got also a few interesting ideas from this workshop that you can apply. Remember, knowledge is potential power, action is power. So pick up some of the ideas that you've taken today and see what you can do differently next time. All the very best. Thank you, Paul. Thank you
Great
to
to
our
see you all.
audience. Let's reconnect again on the 10th of February. And remember, by the way, let me mention once again the Oxford Program on Negotiation. If you want to see Paul and I again in June, then it will be from the 7th to the 12th of June. Check out at the University of Oxford Program on Negotiation. Paul is the director of the program. He has been running it for 6 years. He knows an awful lot about it. I think, you don't want to miss this opportunity to get the most. Thank you very much.
Great. Lovely to see you all. Thanks, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.